As you know, senators, we have two orders of business. We will start by resuming our study of bills S-203, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material. So we will, senators, we will start by presentations of from Julie Davis. I apologize, senators.
Thank you so much. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please. Can you give your presentation?
Thank you, Senator Jaffa, and thank you for the opportunity to join the Canadian Senate today. Yoti is a digital identity platform, a team of over 300 people, headquarters in London, but also represented in Canada. At Yoti, we're providing age assurance, both with hard identifiers from documents and also low friction age estimation via facial analysis. And we're doing this globally. We're keen that there is broad understanding by regulators around the world of the more recent approaches that have undergone thorough scrutiny and approval cycles. In order to do this, we've worked with testing authorities in Germany and in the UK, where approval and audit mechanisms have been put in place. We've passed the audits, for instance, set up by the BBFC, which was the audit body NCC, by the Age Check Certification Scheme, delegated from the Home Office, in Germany by the FSM and the KJM. We're also keen on following standards, so our approaches meet those of the PAS 1296 for age checking, that's the publicly available specification, and I also have the honour of serving on the drafting committee of the next ISO, which will follow on from the PAS. We believe in stakeholder consultation, so recently held another roundtable on our age approaches, inviting 55 regulators and NGOs from 7 countries. And we've since been briefing government teams from the US and New Zealand who are also researching these areas. We're proud to be one of the largest global providers of age assurance approaches, and we work across a whole range of industry sectors, including social media, such as Yubo, the social media live streaming site, age-restricted or adult services, law enforcement, and non-profit organisations. Our solutions have been integrated by some of the world's largest adult content sites, notably mentioned publicly by MindGeek, and our approaches are in use by them already for certain use cases, such as model, age, and identity verification. Our approaches are also in use by law enforcement to ascertain the ages of victims and perpetrators in child abuse material, and by the leading child safety non-profit Childline with the Internet Watch Foundation, whereby a young person can apply to remove an indecent or sexting image where they prove just the fact they're under 18. To date, we've conducted over 500 million age checks. That's in about the last 18 months. And we publish transparently the results of our algorithm of facial analysis age estimation. At the moment, accuracy levels, that's mean absolute error, for 13 to 25-year-olds are within 1.5 years. Just to give you an overview, we have 3 approaches, and we can offer these side by side. 2 of them rely on a root identity document, where just the data minimize attribute, that could be over 18, or it can be the full age if the regulator requires that, in use cases where that's needed for legislation. And then just the data minimize attribute is shared with the site. So to be clear, an adult site would not need to have access to any other biographical or identity details. So let me take the first one, which is the reusable Yoti app, a digital identity app. This requires a 3 to 5 minute setup by a user on their mobile phone, where they add an identity document which is verified. Over 10 million people globally have set up the Yoti app, and then in 2 clicks can share an 18 plus or an age attribute anonymously with the site. There's no surveillance with this. We provide the private key to the individual, and they share just the data minimized attribute. The second approach is where somebody doesn't want to set up an actual app. And this allows an organization to integrate the ID checking in their flow. The user uploads their identity document straight from their browser. That document is reviewed, just the date of birth extracted, and then just the sharing of a data minimized age attribute, such as 18 plus, shared. No document or image needs to be shared then with the content site. The third and least friction of our approaches is one that's been devised with inclusion in mind for people that might not have access to identity documents or might not own one. And this is age estimation using facial analysis. And to be clear, this is facial analysis and definitely not recognition. There's no recognition of an individual. The image is instantly deleted each time an age estimation is done. No data is retained. This has been independently tested, reviewed for bias, and approved. And we're very happy to share these details if there's further interest. There's also a place on our site where you can have a go, you're feeling brave, and have your own age estimated. All three of these age assurance methods can be integrated by an organization in just a few hours, be they a large or small content platform, without prohibitive cost. We also offer a customizable portal where all three approaches can be offered side by side and integrated in one single integration. So it's either standalone or the three side by side. And we publish all of our pricing transparently so that it is accessible to large, medium, and small content producers. The final area that might interest you is around age tokens. This allows an adult to securely prove to one or more sites that they have been age verified by Yoti. So in one sitting, a user would not have to reprove their age multiple times. So a non-shareable one-time use age token just lasts for one session or the period of time agreed by the regulator. I hope that gives a good overview, and thank you very much for your attention today.
Senator Jaffer, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dawson. We appreciate you making time for us at a short notice. We'll now go to Justice Defense Fund, Leila Miville-Dechêne.
Thank you very much. And please excuse the graphic nature and the language that will be used. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about the reality of—
Ms. Miville-Dechêne, may I ask you to have the mic closer, please, for interpretation?
Sorry about that. Yes, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page and understanding the reality of what we're talking about when we talk about the word pornography. I took a sample from Pornhub and X videos, the world's most popular porn sites, yesterday and today, of videos that are on their homepage. These are videos that children would easily access. Stepsister gets cum blasted in the face. Schoolgirl in white socks masturbates in front of teddy bear. Blonde slutty anal stretching and rough gaping anal pounding. Daddy rough face fuck and spanking schoolgirl. Young man is fascinated by tender body of teen who licks his butt. A tiny teen fuck toy gets hard rough anal from step brother. He destroys her in a sex fight and humiliates her. Mom went to work and dad woke me up and recorded me. He said it was to masturbate when I went to class. Spy camera on sister-in-law. Finally, my parents are not home and I tied up my sister and did everything I wanted. This is the popular and most accessible pornography on the world's most popular porn sites today. These mega multinational porn corporations are making hundreds of millions of dollars per year via advertising and user data collection because of unlimited, unrestricted access that drives enormous amounts of traffic to their sites. In 2020, Pornhub boasted 47 million visits per year, 130 million per day. That traffic also consists of underage child users, but these corporations clearly care about profits over people, especially the most vulnerable children. Pornhub's senior community manager was caught saying the following about age verification for children. She said, Pornhub stands to lose 50% of traffic. It costs us money to verify, and overall, it's a disaster. She also said, MindGeek loses money. Any age verification devastates traffic. Clearly, these profit-driven corporations cannot be trusted to self-regulate, And it is the job of government to protect the most vulnerable, especially children, from abuse. And children accessing hardcore pornography is abuse. Not only is the content that children are accessing on mainstream porn sites like Pornhub often violent representations of assault, incest, rape, and other sex crimes, but because these sites do not verify the age or the consent of those in the videos, often the videos on these sites are real sex crime scenes of actual drugged, unconscious sexual assaults, child rape, sex trafficking, and other forms of criminal, non-consensual, image-based sexual abuse. A recent study published by the British Journal of Criminology found that 1 in 8 videos on the home pages of the most visited and popular porn sites in the world, Pornhub, Xvideos, and Xhamster, contain depictions of real sexual crime. Many people argue this is the responsibility of parents to protect their children from these sites. This is a calloused and naive view. We all know there are many children in Canada and around the world that have neglectful parents, parents who are working too hard to put food on the table to pay attention. And many children have no parents at all. What about those children? Who is going to protect them from Pornhub? And even children with attentive parents, they're not under the supervision and the watchful eye of those parents 24/7. It is unfair to parents and unjust to children to place the burden of protection solely on those parents. I am often contacted by distraught mothers and fathers whose young children accidentally or intentionally out of curiosity access mainstream porn sites. One mother recently lamented to me, "My children have been exposed to porn from Pornhub as early as 10 years old. The damage has affected my children and my home, and all my children are now in therapy. One of my sons ended up molesting a child after being exposed to porn on Pornhub and acting out what he saw." A distraught father said, "My 12-year-old son accidentally came across Pornhub while searching for PS4 on Google. He was devastated after seeing Pornhub because he thought the women were being raped. My son hasn't been the same since. I would like to sue Pornhub for what the company did to my child." However, we don't need to rely on anecdotal evidence because we have over 40 years of peer-reviewed research that makes it clear that child access to pornography harms children. And I will share this compiled list of research on this issue with the committee. Lastly, I will end with this. Studies have shown that child exposure to pornography is most often unwanted. The Kaiser Family Foundation has reported that well over 2/3 of 15 to 17-year-old adolescents have seen pornography when they did not want to or intend to access it, with nearly half reporting to being very or somewhat upset by it. Unwanted sexual experiences are what we call sexual assault. You see, when a child witnesses porn through unwanted exposure, or even by curiously stumbling upon it, unaware of what it would contain, it can become a serious and traumatic event in the life of that child. Viewing pornography is a sexual experience. We know why thanks to advances in neuroscience. Researchers now understand the function of what are called mirror neurons in the brain and the role they play in how the psyche and the body react to viewing things with our eyes. Mirror neurons are a type of brain cell that react in the same way when an action is actually performed and when that same action is witnessed being performed by somebody else. These mirror cells were first discovered in the 90s by a team of Italian scientists who identified this phenomenon in the brains of monkeys. When the monkeys reached for a peanut, the exact same individual neurons in the brain of the monkeys fired as when they simply watched another monkey grab a peanut. The neuroscientists discovered the existence of these mirror neurons said, if watching an action and performing that action can activate the same parts of the brain in monkeys down to a single neuron, then it makes sense that watching an action and performing an action could also elicit the same feelings in people. Indeed, it does. And this phenomenon can be applied to the case of children viewing pornography.
Can you please wind up now? Please?
Yes, just probably 30 seconds more. Neuroscientist Donald Hilton has said that viewing other humans experience sexuality is sexuality to the viewer. An 11-year-old boy or girl, therefore, experiences the unwanted, often violent criminal sexual visuals in pornography as a form of sexual trauma. In 1970, Thomas Emerson, a legal theorist who was a major architect of civil liberties laws, said that imposing what he called erotic material on individuals against their will is a form of action that has all the characteristics of physical assault. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 19 says, state parties shall take appropriate legislative measures to protect children from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury, or abuse, including sexual abuse. I urge this committee to see the importance of Bill S-203 and the urgency for which it needs to be passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now go to the Oxford Internet Institute and to Professor Victoria Nash.
Thank you so much, Senator Jaffer. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak here this evening. I thought it might be helpful just to introduce my own background and area of research before I give my preliminary comments. I am a social scientist, a political theorist, and I conduct research into children's internet use and the strengths and weaknesses of different digital policies targeted at children. On this particular topic of pornography and age verification or age assurance, my primary experience came several years ago when the UK's Digital Economy Bill was being prepared, and I was asked to conduct a review of evidence relating to children's access to online pornography, the routes by which they access that pornography, and likely efficacy of age verification or age assurance measures. More recently, we've been looking at this topic again, but from the perspective of data protection. In the UK, we have something called the Age Appropriate Design Code, which has its foundation in data protection regulation, but seeks to deliver principles for companies providing online services likely to be used by minors, such that, again, it introduces incentives for companies to identify the age of users. I would say, first and foremost, that as an academic researcher, it is very much up to all of you as senators to determine whether or not age assurance or age verification are appropriate policy tools for preventing access to pornographic material online. But I would flag up what I think are several quite important considerations that deserve to be taken into account when looking at the utility of this particular tool. And vitally, I think these particular factors I'm going to briefly list are ones which, if you like, highlight certain trade-offs which will inherently exist in any legislation that you produce, which has its basis in verifying or assuring the age of users. So the first factor I think it's worth considering is that age assurance is generally a very blunt tool that has no regard for the maturity or vulnerability of the child. This is perhaps less of a problem when we are looking at a narrow scope of online content. So for example, looking at, say, commercial pornography providers, certainly in the UK, it would be illegal anyway to produce and publish that material to minors. But arguably, it may be more of a problem if your legislation wishes to cover a wider array of online content, so things like social media, for example. And the reason that it matters is when I say that AV or age assurance is a blunt tool, the point is that what it will do is it will reassure you whether that user is, say, over 18 or maybe under 18, over 13, under 13. What it won't tell you is whether or not that particular individual is particularly vulnerable, might need additional protections, or maybe is particularly mature and may be very well placed to enjoy an element of online risk. So again, it matters, I think, what type of platform we are using these tools on. And in particular, perhaps, it's worth thinking about what the benefits to young users might be of being able to enjoy those platforms. So again, our last speaker demonstrated, I think, quite strongly some of the incredibly powerful arguments for keeping children off commercial pornography sites. But I would say that those same arguments don't apply quite so strongly in relation to, say, social media sites, where there are many clearer benefits to younger users, which we would not wish to see them separated from. I think Julie did a very good job at the beginning about talking of the importance of privacy protection in using age assurance tools. And I would just add that I think for a company like Yoti, I believe they do have very high standards of data minimization and data protection, including for very young users. I would add that certainly in the UK context, we had some qualms about companies more closely linked to commercial pornography providers delivering age verification or age assurance, because we felt there was more incentive for them to use users' data in generating improved services, which I think probably wouldn't exist in the Yoti case. Thirdly, and I've only got one more after this, competition issues are worth bearing in mind. If we look at online companies, it is very much the case that actually some may benefit from the introduction of high-cost regulatory barriers. So in other words, the companies that make the most money are the ones that traditionally will be able to comply with regulation or legislation. That may not be so easy for smaller providers. I don't know what our next speaker will say, but I have read some interesting research in the context of pornography that suggests that actually what that might do is disadvantage, for example, ethical providers, feminist providers, providers of content suitable for different sexual minorities and so on. So I'd be interested to think more about that. And then last but not least, it's worth considering the freedom of expression and freedom of information considerations. Again, these seem maybe more limited in relation to commercial pornography provision, but depending on the breadth of the legislation you're intending to introduce, I think it's important to remember two things. The first is that certainly sites with heavy sexual content may themselves be educational. So certainly we had problems in the UK when we first introduced at-home filtering, such that some important sexual health charities were blocked for teenagers. But the second is, again, I think it is worth bearing in mind that certainly as teens age, they are going to seek out risk, they are going to seek out sexual content. And certainly the nearer they are, if you like, to the age of majority, it's worth considering, I think, what counts as free access to information, even controversial, even sexual information, as an important right for that older age group. So for me, I think in summary, I would just suggest that it's really important as you look at this legislation to think about both what age verification or age assurance will offer in terms of protection, but what it may also close down depending on the scope of your laws. And secondly, I would just note in concluding that certainly all our research suggested that age assurance and age verification is no silver bullet, and a determined team who wishes to seek out this material will always find ways of doing so. So for me, that is the reason why education policy, sexual health education, relationships education is a really vital accompaniment to tools of this sort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nash. And I know you were contacted at a very late time, and you still accommodated us. So we thank you for that. We will now go to from BC Coalition of Experimental Communities to Susan Davis. Mr. Davis.
Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. I just would like to start by acknowledging that I'm testifying today from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm here today to represent Canadian sex workers as the director of the BC Coalition, and I want to start by stating that I am not an academic. I am a sex worker actively working in the sex industry as an independent escort for 35 years. I have broad experience in many areas of the industry, as many sex industry workers do. I migrated across the industry and this country with the availability of work. I have worked in micro brothels, businesses run from residential spaces, escort agencies, massage parlors, adult film, and on the street in Halifax, Moncton, Montreal, Toronto, Surrey, New West, and Vancouver. I have spent time in prison and survived numerous assaults and attempts on my life. I've battled cocaine and heroin addiction and survived 4 overdoses. I also note that it seems that I'm the only Canadian witness here today, which I think is a bit of a shame. I'm not a representative of a minority of sex workers in Canada. I am a representative of the majority. My experiences with criminalization, violence, and the outcomes of bias laws have led to my 19 years in advocacy for the rights and safety of Canadian sex workers. My greatest achievement has been the adoption of the lowest level of enforcement policy by the City of Vancouver and Vancouver Police, which has now been adopted by all 45 police services and the E Division of the RCMP here in British Columbia. The net result of those sex worker safety-centered policies is a tremendous success, with safer indoor workspaces stabilized and no murders of sex workers in the City of Vancouver for 12 years and counting. I am here today to try to represent the interests of my community and to draw attention to the many flaws and impacts Bill S-203 could have on our lives and safety. First, the biased and flawed data which is being used as the foundation of this bill, with no regard for the rules set out that govern research involving human beings in this country. The current context of sex workers making difficult choices during the COVID-19 pandemic and significant migration from in-person sex work to online and adult film sex work, further restricting people's options for survival in this regard, will have predictable negative outcomes. Of course, facial recognition, age verification technology are flawed and experimental technologies which have been shown in several recent studies to be biased, racist, and sexist in platforms where they've been implemented. The use of age verification and age estimation as terms describing these technologies reveals these flaws and potential for bias or algorithm mistakes. Privacy, of course, protected storage of this kind of data by tech companies has been proven to be impossible. Breaches are happening daily, and given the intimate nature of this data, the risk is unacceptable. Stigma faced by sex workers and the potential for weaponizing this data using that stigma and fear are real and predictable. The United Nations Charter of Human Rights prohibits the use of the rights of one group to destroy the rights of another. Sex workers' rights and safety are not a reasonable casualty in the experiment proposed by this bill. Missed opportunities. The exclusion of the people with the most experience in this area of trying to verify the age of the users of their sites and who will be directly impacted by this bill will lead to negative outcomes. They have lots to offer in terms of knowledge and experience, and I think it's a mistake to bypass them as witnesses in this work. Impartiality. Statements made by committee members in support of this bill before your work is complete demonstrates the lack of impartiality being shown to sex workers who are citizens of Canada with rights. The Standing Orders Act and the codes of conduct which govern your work require impartiality. The anti-sex work lobby are working hard, of course. This is an attack on our community and our ability to feed and house ourselves and our families. All sex workers post sexually explicit images on the internet, and all sex workers would be impacted by this bill. We would like to acknowledge how difficult it can be to hear the stories of tragedy and the most extreme cases being presented. These stories and assertions are meant to impact you emotionally. No one is trying to dismiss the stories of those impacted by exploitation or non-consensual image sharing or those negatively impacted by consuming pornography. We are asking, however, that you try to understand the political agenda of the anti-sex work lobby. They want you to be offended. They want you to feel repulsed. They want to abolish our community and choices. They make biased, emotional, and ideological arguments against our ability to feed and house ourselves with no consideration for the impact on our lives. We appeal to you for impartial and rational attention to these issues and for understanding that the extreme examples being given are not a reflection of our industry, that the majority of people working or operating businesses in our industry are ethical and share the same concerns about exploitation and proliferation of violent sexual images. This bill is flat with no strategy or funding proposed for the obvious remedy to issues with young people viewing sexually explicit material, sex education. There's no planning for this critical aspect of providing information and support for youth who are exploring their sexuality. Last, we are people with families who love us. Our lives and safety depend on your decisions here. This cannot be overstated given the current context of sex workers' choices in Canada. We hope to see a more balanced approach to these issues moving forward, which respects sex workers' lives and safety as citizens of this country. We recommend that the committee take the time to scrutinize all research and data presented for consideration and decisions regarding this bill to ensure ethics and meeting the test of the Tri-Council policy statement. That the committee reach out to adult film business operators to draw on their expertise and experience with age verification. That the committee seriously consider the risks to the lives and safety of sex workers when making decisions about this bill. That the committee remember its commitment to impartiality and try to refrain from emotional responses. That the committee remember the difficult situation faced by Canadian sex workers during this incredible time and work to not further narrow people's choices for housing and feeding themselves. that the committee recognize the reasons why other countries have abandoned the idea of facial recognition, age verification, or age estimation technology, and that the committee reject Bill S-203 in its entirety based on the clear and predictable threat it poses to sex workers and the privacy of all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis, for your presentation. Ms. Davis, I want to assure you that we've had many panels. We've heard from many panels on this issue and many Canadians on this issue. And we are very honored that the international witnesses are assisting us with this bill to show what's happening in their countries and what is happening internationally. And so we appreciate them being here as well. But we've heard from many other witnesses as well. We will now go on to questions, and we will start with the sponsor of the bill, Senator Miville-Dechêne.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. Thank you to all witnesses for your very thoughtful testimony. I want to come back to this question of privacy on age verification, because since I've presented this bill, this question has been asked me a lot of time. So maybe to Victoria Nash and Julie Dawson, do you think porn platform, porn sites should do this age verification, or should it be a third party who does it? And maybe more pointedly to Julie Dawson, you said you have a contract now with Pornhub. Pornhub has been asked by the French government, by the French authorities, to verify age of their customers a few weeks ago. Are you involved with that particular project?
Senator Dechêne, would you like Victoria to go first, or would you like
you can start, Mrs. Dawson.
Okay, thank you. So to your first point, I do think it's crucial that you don't mark your own homework. And I would think that one of the key learnings from the Digital Economy Act was the recommendation that it should be something, age checking, that is done outside of the companies. To your second point, with regards MindGeek, we are working with MindGeek. We have presented material. We're members of an organisation called Point de Contact, which is probably the equivalent of the Internet Watch Foundation in France. They operate a hotline in this area, and they have presented materials around this. They've been part of the committees for the CSA, Conseil Supérieur de l'Audiovisuel. And we have shared materials with them. We haven't as yet been invited to a session such as this with them, though we have offered to do that should they so choose. The integration with MindGeek goes across several areas. One is for actual models and assessing the age plus identity of models. And the second area is with regards users. That is something that already way back 2 years ago was a discussion in the UK. And crucially, just to recap a couple of the points, it is most definitely facial analysis. It is not facial recognition. So one, it detects a face, and then it looks at the characterization and assesses age. In that training set, there is no recognition. It's just an anonymous face, month of year and birth that is used to train the algorithm. So in no way can it ever be facial recognition. It never recognizes an individual. I hope that's helpful.
It is. Mrs. Nash, maybe on that question of who should verify what and privacy.
Certainly. This is a very important aspect. I'm glad you're focusing on this. I would absolutely agree with Julie that I think that it should be a company, if you like, at one remove from the pornography provider that is responsible for carrying out age assurance checks. I actually think that is for two reasons, though. So one is the marking your own homework point, which has already been made. I actually think there's a second consideration, though, which is around the use of individual data. And I think that actually from a privacy perspective, it is helpful to have companies who are not incentivized to analyze the data of, if you like, which adult sites are being visited by which individuals, how frequently, what type of content, etc. So again, I think keeping those companies arm's length helps with that. The one other thing I would add, and I think we missed this in the UK with our Digital Economy Act, I think there do have to be minimum standards for data protection and privacy set up in conjunction with this sort of legislation to ensure that any approved providers of age assurance do meet minimum standards and can ensure users that there will be no possibility of data breaches.
Merci. Thank you.
Go to Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I have no questions at this time.
Thank you. Senator Batters.
Thank you very much. My first question is for Lila Mickelwaite, founder of Trafficking Hub and CEO of the Justice Defense Fund. And first of all, I'm glad that in your materials, it was a good point you make to, instead of calling it child pornography, to call it child sexual abuse material, because very clearly that's what it is. Now, I understand that you are supportive of this legislation, but my question is, does your organization believe that this bill goes far enough? Or are there additional measures that parliamentarians should be taking to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material?
Sarah.
Ms. Mickelwaite, you're on mute, sorry.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I think that this bill is an extraordinarily important step. I think it does go far enough. I think that, being able to make sure that those who are used in pornography behind the screen are of age and are consenting adults, not victims of trafficking or child rape, for example, but also protecting those who are in front of the screen and making sure that those are not children who are accessing this content. I mean, in my opinion, this is common sense, protective measures that need to be implemented. We don't allow children to go into a sex shop and purchase a pornographic video. We should not allow them to be able to enter a virtual sex shop and do the same. And like I mentioned before, the examples I gave at the beginning of my presentation were not extreme examples meant to elicit disgust, but they were frankly samples of the most popular and homepage material on the world's most popular and most frequented porn sites. These are not extreme examples. This is the content that children will access when they land on these sites.
Thank you. And my second question is for Julie Dawson of Yoti. When the UK was considering this type of approach, there were many skeptics who pointed to online tutorials and step-by-step instructions about how to sidestep age verification technology, for example, by generating a non-existent credit card number. One UK journalist demonstrated how he sidestepped the age verification in less than 2 minutes. So I'm just wondering, has the technology improved since 2018? And does it concern you that resourceful minors might be able to easily work around this technology?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I think absolutely there are more approaches that are on the market over the last several years, and those will keep on evolving. Absolutely, you're right that there will always be people around the world. In the same way that we have a fraud landscape, we will have people that will always look at how to circumvent things. I think it would be disingenuous to say otherwise. However, we undertake, for instance, on our methods, a lot of what we call anti-spoofing checks to check how hard it is to circumvent them. And I think if you're an audit body, that should be the sort of test that you are undertaking. And that is one of the things that we have offered, and we have suggested, for example, to the different audit bodies, they can employ the age technologies, one, to assess if the work that platform's doing is working, but also it's really vital that NGOs and the auditors do check and find out how easy it is to circumvent things. If you're looking at age estimation using facial analysis, we've looked at, for instance, the impact of masks and mask wearing over the last period. We've also looked at makeup. We've performed a whole range of different tests, and on an ongoing basis, we look at what are the next attack vectors, and that is crucial.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Batters. We'll go to Senator Dalphond and then to Senator Pate. Senator Dalphond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the panelists for being with us today. Certainly a wide range of perspective, and that's very informative. My question would be for Professor Nash. I know it's late, but I'm sure that I see you're still well alert. So you've done a lot of research. I found very interesting the effective age verification techniques, the report you did in 2013 about gambling. Now I would like to really speak about the introduction in the UK of the age restrictions to adult content online. Could you give us more substance about how is it going and where it's going and what are the problems, if any?
I will do so. You might ask Julie as well, who I expect sees this on the ground even more than I do. Thank you for the nice words about that report. Many elements of that 2013 report, I think, are fundamentally still relevant now. That there are lessons that we can learn from sectors such as illegal gambling, which have in particular countries introduced quite rigorous age checks. In the UK context, our situation is an odd one. So we had a Digital Economy Act introduced in 2017, which purported to mandate age checks for, I can't remember the exact definition, I know it's commercial pornography providers, but I think it was if more than a third of the content on their sites was deemed pornographic. The regulator was set up to be the British Board of Film Classification, and we all expected to see a couple of years later the full rollout of that scheme. In fact, it never happened, and I'm sure Julie and others in the age verification sector felt very frustrated by that. We currently have a new bill before Parliament, the Online Harms Bill. Again, that was expected to include very specific measures, again, around accessing adult content, and was again expected to introduce new measures regarding age assurance, and it's actually missing. So the suggestion at the moment is this might be introduced as an amendment in the parliamentary term. I believe that the Secretary of State is open to that, but yes, it's very interesting it didn't appear. I don't know the rationale as to why it has been excluded or why it failed after the Digital Economy Act was introduced. A lot of the media coverage suggested it was due to concerns about privacy and data protection standards. I suspect a fair amount of industry lobbying probably as well. Anything further that I can help with on that?
Mrs. Dawson, you want to add something about the inability so far to provide some kind of workable measures to restrict access?
Yes, I think there was definitely probably several factors around Brexit and a new term of government that maybe didn't want, we call it the Daily Mail test, the broadsheet newspapers might finding it not the best thing in your first 100 days in office to be bringing in something that might be quite controversial and unpopular. So probably the timing wasn't the best. However, there's several things that have been happening. Professor Nash mentioned the age-appropriate design code coming in this September in the UK. Is focusing a lot of attention on age checking across a whole range of platforms, be that all platforms looking at designing appropriately for age. There's also across Europe the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, looking at video sharing content, as well as the online safety bill that Professor Nash mentioned. And indeed, across Europe, there's also an EU project called the EU Consent Project, building an interoperable approach for age verification and parental consent that kicked off on the 1st of March. Across industry, from the adult industry, I took part in the development of the PAS 1296, where it was clear to me that what the adult companies were looking for was a level playing field. A lot of them were parents, and despite what people might think, they said if there is a level playing field and there is a specific date, we will meet this. What they didn't want was that to be a different playing field for social media providers versus adult providers, or for to be unclear in terms of enforcement. And I think we've seen that even more in the last 6 months, whereby there's a lot more proactive discussion from the content companies who've probably done quite well over the last 18 months of lockdown, looking and thinking, how should we get ahead of the curve when we see on the horizon Audiovisual Media Services Directive, online safety bill, as well as age-appropriate design code. I think clearly the writing is on the wall, and hence a lot of those providers have been proactively doing due diligence behind doors, looking at what methods they would integrate. And we have integrated with quite a few different ones, of which only a minority are already public.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dalfon. We'll now go to Senator Pate and then Senator Dupuy. Senator Pate.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. We've heard from experts and from young people about the lack of effective sex education for young Canadians, as well as young people worldwide, and how this can exacerbate the harms that young people experience when they fall upon or come upon pornography, and those become the sites for education in the absence of other sources. I'm wondering if you have, each of you have thoughts about best practices for sex education, and if you have some examples that we could be looking to in terms of observations this committee might make in terms of some of the necessary corollaries for this type of legislation. Thank you.
I can add a thought here. You know, I think that regardless of age verification implementation, there will always be those who are going to end up being exposed to pornography. And I think it's important to develop resilience in children to be able to go through those encounters and come out the other side unscathed. I think that what needs to happen, there needs to be you know, a significant amount of education for those who are caretakers of children in schools, and also for parents. We need to create shame-free zones where children feel that they can speak about these issues, that they can go to a trusted adult to be able to ask questions and get healthy answers versus go to you know, these most mainstream pornography sites where they will see you know, sexual violence and could likely see actual sex crime scenes as their sex education.
I guess I would just like to say that there's never been adequate sex education in this country. This is a huge issue that needs to be addressed in a much broader way. There needs to be funding to NGOs and others to develop these, excuse me, develop these programs, as well as in partnership with youth. The people who are going to be receiving the training need to be included in the development of the training. So I have never heard of a really good sex education program in any country, anywhere that I've heard of that's actually met this sort of a need. Of course, it should include something about internet literacy, about teaching children how to avoid these kinds of things if they're worried about it. And also, you know, again, that we have helplines and things like that that people can call. You know, educate them about what resources there are for them, that where they could call somebody and see, you know, and discuss something if they found something that they were uncomfortable with. But I think that the main point here is that this bill, with none of that in place, is pointless. You know, so all you're going to do is narrow choices for youth who are trying to explore their sexuality under the umbrella of trying to protect children, and put nothing in the void, in the place of that. So it just makes no sense to me that the bill has no provision for that whatsoever. And of course, to me, the main issue with this bill is that there's no provision or consideration or even thought given to the people who work in this field, and nobody seems to be mentioning them whatsoever. So yeah, for the sex education portion, work with youth, work with elders and First Nations communities, talk to people about what it is that's appropriate for various communities across this country, and make sure that it's appropriate.
Thank you. Was anything like this done in Britain when it was introduced? I'm not sure, Ms. Dawson, if you can.
I remember some materials through the NSPCC. I don't know if Professor Nash would have access to the sources.
I think I probably would. I mean, I think the one key step for us was that we did actually, as a result of that discussion, introduce compulsory sex education at secondary school level, which we did not previously have. So that alone is a significant step. The first curriculum, I believe, has been taught this year. So obviously, you know, we might want to look at the evaluations of that to see how successful it is. The one thing I would add, and very much agree with, I think, everything that our previous speaker, Susan, said, I would note that I think there is a risk sometimes that we see pornography as a sort of a standalone element within which all children's experience or young people's experience of sexual content occurs. But the reality is we live in a very sexualized culture, whether it's music videos, film, TV. And I think that actually, you know, the rationale for sort of strong sexual education, teaching fiction, so depiction of sexual content as a form of fiction, whether that's in pornography or films, is very important, I know, as a component of our education. But beyond that, it's not a field that I'm an expert in.
Senator Campbell or Senator Batters? Unfortunately, Senator Jaffer was cut off. So if one of you could take over as chair, that would be much appreciated.
Go ahead, Senator Batters.
I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. Has that, you can hear me with my microphone now, I hope. All right, so I'm sorry, I don't know who is next on the list to ask a question. Mark, could you let me know? Do you know?
I believe it's oui, Sénatrice Dupuis.
Okay, Sénatrice Dupuis.
Merci, Madame la Vice.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I have a question for Susan Davis and a question for Julie Dawson. My first question, you are very clear when you say, and I understand your position very well, so you say that this bill is totally inadequate in regards to sex workers. Could you tell me what, in your opinion, could or should be removed or added to a bill like this one to make it acceptable to you who represent sex workers?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that could be added to this bill to make it appropriate for sex workers. The goal of the bill is to not only to limit access of youth to sexually explicit content, but to limit access really to sexually explicit content for everyone. I think that there's, you know, we're missing a piece here where every single sex worker in this country has sexually explicit ads with pictures, whether that's just for escort services or it's for clip sales. And so the bill itself doesn't give any definition of what is sexually explicit. What exactly are the limitations on this? Is it narrowly targeting adult film, or is it broadly targeting the entire industry? It's fairly well known that Senator Miville-Dechêne is against the sex industry. So my assumption is that it's targeting the entire industry. Do we want to see sex workers forced back to the street and removed from the internet completely? Is this the goal? For me, there is nothing that we could add to this that would make it any less dangerous for my community, especially given the migration towards online working because of the pandemic and generally even before that. So for me, really, this bill was ill thought out, ill planned, and really didn't take into consideration the Canadians who work in this field and who feed and house their families using the income from those safest, most high-paying jobs in the sex industry that there are. So for me, there's nothing that could be added to this bill and that should be completely scrapped.
Est-ce que si vous dites qu'il y a...
If you say nothing can be added, would you say that there's something that should be removed? In other words, for example, people who are in the sex work industry, should they be excluded because it's a profession rather than a commercial operation like Pornhub and company?
Je m'excuse, je ne peux pas.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I'll start again. Do you think, since there's nothing that could be added to make it acceptable, should there be an exclusion in this bill for the work done by sex workers, in the sense where we would say if they're doing their work, they should be excluded from this type of bill because they're not doing a commercial operation that's in a profitable business at the expense of children?
People who work in adult film are sex workers. So I don't see how there could be an exclusion given that the bill is targeting adult film and adult film workers. The assertions that have been made here about how every single video is exploitative and is rape and all these things are the same things that we hear about sex work from anti-sex work people all the time. Of course, they would say likely that I'm living in a false consciousness and I only think that I am choosing sex work and really I'm just so damaged I don't know what I'm doing. This argument has been going on in Canada for decades. I wish that we could count on facts and ethical data and research to make these decisions, and that the kinds of assertions made by witnesses in previous panels about how children become rapists and all this sort of thing could be actually vetted, because I just don't understand how a bill like this could be formed, founded on unreliable, unethical data, which does not meet the test of the Tri-Council policy statement or research involving human beings in this country, and then form a legislation. I really don't understand. If there was to be a legislation like this, I would say scrap Bill S-203 and begin again from the beginning and include people who work in the field, including those who own businesses, including those who work as adult entertainers and performers. And then perhaps you could come up with something that was a little more reasonable. This is just so extremely biased against my community that I really just don't see any way to salvage it.
Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il y aurait...
Does that mean there would be more work that needs to be done?
We'll need to go on to the next questioner. Just so
Okay, second round then. Merci.
All right, if we have time, thank you. Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. Your presentations were very interesting. My first question will be for Ms. Miville-Dechêne. In your opinion, are there studies that could show a relationship between the development of violent behavior in children and the frequent viewing of photos or films that are pornographic?
Thank you for that question. I think it's very important. Like I said in my presentation, we have over 40 years of peer-reviewed research that demonstrates the harm that pornography viewing does to children who are viewing this content. I think, we talk about viewing and doing. When we view this content, there was a study done that showed that over 88% of mainstream pornography films contain sexual violence. And when children are viewing this content, research has shown that it does something in their brain that creates permission-giving beliefs. Permission-given beliefs enable them then to more easily act out in sexually violent ways. And so I think, like I mentioned before, I would be very happy.
So they'll develop behavior through imitation.
Sorry, I didn't get the translation.
So they will develop behaviors through imitation, if I've understood correctly. And now a question for Ms. Davis. We're a little stuck with your position, which I understand very well. I don't know if you have children, but we know that today children have a lot of access to the internet, especially with video games. And what we see more and more when people are on these games, when children are on these games, there are pop-ups, pornographic advertising, and other advertising on slot machines, for example. If you're a parent, and how would you protect your children so they're not influenced by that violence, which is often part of pornography on the internet? How can we protect our children if we can't legislate?
Well, first, I would say that I don't think that pornography is synonymous with violence. I think that that's a flawed assumption from the beginning. In terms of my children, I talk to my children. I create a trusting relationship. I talk to them openly about sex and sexuality.
Ms. Davis, you're aware that there are two types of pornography. There's soft porn and hardcore porn. And children don't disassociate here. When they look at hardcore porn, where there's violence and sexual exploitation and assault, do you think that that type of porn has no impact on the future behavior of our children?
So I sort of understand French, and I'm not getting any translation here, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. The thing for me here is that, you know, when you look into the data and the research that is being referenced by Madame Miville-Dechêne, I think is her last name, there's questions about whether or not that data is ethical. The numbers that are being bandied about, such as, you know, 88% is violent, or whatever it was that she said. And in the other testimony from the other witnesses in the other panel, we heard that 11-year-old boys are 60% likely to act out the violent scenes that they've witnessed. It's just, when you look into this research and try to find the source of those numbers, it's not there. I have learned about policy. This is how I have been successful in my advocacy work. And I'm not trying to say that we don't need to protect children. Children need to be educated about these things, to be given the tools to make safe decisions when they're using the internet, and to have people that they can talk to about their sexuality in a safe way. However, these kinds of...
I'm sorry, Davis, we need to go on to the next question, or we're over that particular segment. Senator Cotter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions, and one might be to enable Ms. Davis to complete her point. And maybe I could start with that question, Ms. Davis, and also describe a question for Ms. Micklewade, if I may. Ms. Davis, the impression I'm drawing from your testimony and your responses is that you're opposed in principle to putting in place restrictions on young people's access to porn on the internet. So, and I'd like you to be able to respond to that. If I've misstated it and you are supportive of the sort of the philosophy of the bill, I'd be interested in your thoughts on how that can be achieved. And with respect to Ms. Micklewade, you know, I've read your material, the writing in the New York Times. I think this is a larger philosophical project for you. This is one part of a larger philosophical project. In Canada, the question for us is limited to young people and access to porn. The sex industry and sex workers are constitutionally protected in the Canadian framework by the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. So that's kind of, if I may say, sort of off the table for our conversation here. Would you say that this bill is structured in a way that can achieve the more specific and limited objective of protecting children from the exposures about which you are concerned? Thank you.
So I guess I will go first. I am not opposed to trying to educate and ensure that children are not exposed to violent pornography. That is not the point that I'm making at all. I'm trying to defend people who work in that sector because these are some of the highest paying, safest jobs for sex workers in this country, especially given that people are migrating online due to the pandemic and were migrating there before. My issue here is that we're using the excuse of protecting children to try to limit all people's access to adult film, and without any consideration for the people who work in that sector. My point is that we're basing all of these decisions on research which has been proven to be flawed. When I looked at it myself, and I'm a layperson, okay? Granted, over the last 19 years, I've learned a lot about what the Tri-Council policy statement means, but when we use data that is in conflict with the rules that govern research involving human beings, we always end up with negative outcomes. If we don't include the people that will be the most directly impacted in development of these policies, we will not have the outcome that we want. And it's not justifiable to throw sex worker safety under the bus to protect children and youth in the way that's being proposed here. I think that if you
could I ask Ms. Mickelwaite before my time runs out, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I think that if there is not a way that we can protect children without harming those who are in the industry, then we have a different problem on our hands. We do not allow children to enter a strip club. We should also restrict children from being able to enter a virtual strip club. And when we talk about violent content, whether this is staged, studio produced content, or whether this is real sexual violence, there's no question that this content is, it does contain quite a lot of violence. But even if it didn't, even if this was just what we would call, normal sexual interactions, children are not able to process that kind of material without being harmed at young ages. And I think that is just, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that children should not be having those kinds of sexual experiences, and they need to be protected from those experiences. And we need to be able to do that in a way that prioritizes the safety of the most vulnerable in society and children really above everybody else.
Okay, thanks
you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cotter. Next, we will have Senator Simons, and then after that, Senator Carignan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess my question is for Ms. Dawson. Pornography is not my cup of tea, but it is legal in Canada, and Canadians have a constitutional right to access it. And I share Ms. Davis's concerns that the inevitable result of facial not recognition, what did you call it? Facial analysis software will be to frighten away adults who don't want to risk having their face shown and recorded, who are worried about blackmail, who are worried about their privacy being violated. And I also worry about the efficacy of the software to make fine distinguishments. I mean, how does your software differentiate between someone who's 17 and a half and someone who's 18? Is there a danger that it may not recognize accurately the age of a Southeast Asian Canadian, or someone who's trans and going through transition, transitioning from from a female identity to a male one, and who may appear to be adolescent or younger than their age? So I guess that's a twofold question. How does the software accurately ensure that everybody who has a right to access this material gets to exercise that right? And what do you say to the, I think, very legitimate concern that people would have that even as law-abiding adult consumers, they don't want to put themselves through the proposition of having their face analyzed?
Thank you very much for that question. Taking your points with regards to the efficacy, when we've worked with regulators, what they have done is to set a buffer. So the technology is 1.5 years of accuracy for 13 to 25-year-olds. So for example, in the UK, the Digital Economy Act, the regulator was looking at a 3 to 5 year buffer, and that was back almost 2.5 years ago. In our latest conversations with regulators, depending on the sector, again, they're looking at circa a 3-year buffer. So it would be people only over aged 21 that would be able to see adult content for 18 pluses using that one mechanism, which is why we offer 3 mechanisms side by side, and there are obviously other mechanisms on the market. And that would enable people that do not want to use age estimation using facial analysis to have other approaches. However, in testing that we have done, For instance, working in the retail sector, we've worked with one of the largest bricks and mortar retailers in the US. And in a 2-week period, this was people at a self-checkout buying age-restricted goods. We had over 70% of shoppers using this approach in the flow. It's also live in other countries. We've actually got live implementations of this software already, and we have not found it to be a material disinhibitor, but always we recommend to the organizations to absolutely offer different methods side by side. And to be very clear, we offer and we share exactly how accurate it is across gender and across ages, and we update that every few months. And specifically with regards to skin tone, we test it across skin tones, and we use the Fitzpatrick matrix all the way from skin tones 1 to 6, and we show very clearly how accurate it is, and we ensure that there is not material disadvantage to those of any skin tone. And actually, for some of the younger demographics, we're more accurate on the darkest skin tone, but we continue to look at that, and we continue to share that every few months.
You know, the word Orwellian gets thrown around far too easily in our political discourse. But I find there's something extraordinarily dystopian about the world you are painting, that someone should have to have this kind of analysis to buy cigarettes at a grocery store or, you know, wine at a wine shop. I'm repulsed by the kinds of pornography that were described to us. I am equally as repulsed by the idea of living in a world where either government actors or commercial actors are surveilling me as I go about purchasing things that are my legal right to purchase.
So I think that the difference here is that there is no surveillance. No one is actually recognizing you. In the same way I might look at you and say 45.
Oh, that's all right. You're my new favorite witness of all time.
The same way that I look at you and make a judgment.
We're about
the image is instantly deleted.
So
yeah,
thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is Senator Carignan on? I'm not sure if he had his camera on. So if Senator Carignan's on, great. If not, we will go on to a brief second round, starting with, first of all, with the sponsor of the bill, Senator Miville-Dechêne. And then we will have a brief second round question also for Senator Dupuis. So Senator Miville-Dechêne, please. Thank you.
So I just wanted, on the first point, Mrs. Davis, we've talked at length about those questions, and obviously we do not agree, but you characterized me as being against sex workers and all that. I just want to say that I've said in my past life that there was a lot of exploitation in prostitution, and this is my position, and I don't have any grudges against sex workers. So that being said, I just want to go back to Mrs. Dawson to let her finish her thought about this interesting question that Senator Simon asked, which is surveillance, and are you keeping? What do you do with the information you're getting?
Thank you. So the image is instantly deleted with every age estimation using facial analysis. In the same way I look at one person, I give a personal judgment. That's what the algorithm does. It's only been trained with anonymous face, month and year of birth. So each time it looks, says 42, 36, 72, and it instantly deletes that. We Yoti never receive back the result of that. That just goes to the company with a confidence level. This is being used, for example, and you may or may not think this Orwellian, but to triage hundreds and hundreds of thousands of child sexual abuse images and to ascertain ages of victims and perpetrators. This is enabling triage for lots of sites that couldn't have enough humans doing that, looking and estimating, and that's all that it's doing. And looking at it in the retail context, we have across the world rising levels of verbal, physical and racial abuse to retail staff at the point of checking age. We have people losing documents, so 1 million driving licenses, 400,000 passports just in the UK each year lost and stolen, putting those people at increased level of identity theft and fraud. So what we offer is always several mechanisms side by side. If someone's not happy with facial analysis age estimation, they can use one of the other two methods or just ask for somebody in person as previously. And that's what we recommend to sites. Offer a range of options and do not be dictatorial. Let the market decide what they want to use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will now go on for the last second round question to Senator Dupuy.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My question is for Ms. Dawson. When you talk about the three methods that you described with the YOTI AB ID checking and the low friction face analysis, there are traces left. If I try to access a site, I always leave traces. You're saying it's a series of numbers that go through and are erased. I'd like to believe you that this system is set up in such a way that it doesn't retain anything of what it analyzed. That's not my concern. My concern is, what are you doing with the trace that I can't help but leave, which does last in your systems when I try to access a pornographic site?
Thank you for that question. So I think I've understood it. What trace do I as a user leave with YOTI rather than with the site?
That is to say, I want to access a site and I have to go through age verification. So access is controlled, it's blocked. I have to prove with my date of birth, for example, one way or another, I have to prove my age. So that leaves a trace, not just on your age verification, but I'm also on the website in question. And we know that that lasts. So what kind of guarantee can we have that it won't be used by others?
Understood. So with the YOTI app, we've a setup that means we have a non-relational database. Once you've set up your YOTI, we shard all your different attributes, your name, your age, your date of birth, and only you choose to share just your over 18 attribute. And when you do that, we don't know that it's Senator Dupuy that shared that attribute or anyone else. We just know that an attribute has been shared. And the site just receives the attribute. We don't know that it's you that shared that attribute. We just know that an attribute has been shared. With the case of the age estimation using facial analysis, again, we provide this on a software as a service basis, and the site, say Pornhub, requests the use of that software. They send an image to the server that says, this is a face. The software looks at the face, gives its assessment, instantly deletes it, and all the site has is a confidence level that this is over the age of 18. We don't have a trace of who that was, which face that was. All we know is that the software has given an age estimate. So we don't know what the face was, what the name was, but just we give them a confidence score. This was over or under the requested age.
Oui, mais moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est...
But what concerns me, excuse me, Senator Dupuy.
Over the time
it's
frame.
over. Merci.
So
Merci.
we will have to end it there, but thank you so much to all of the witnesses and to the senators for being patient with me. Very inexperienced person in this particular chair. So thank you very much to all of the witnesses, especially as Senator Jaffer indicated before, for accepting at the last minute and really providing us some valuable information as we study this important bill. We will now suspend briefly so that we can go in camera for the next part of our meeting, because we're going to be just considering a draft report on Bill C-30. So we will suspend for a few minutes, 5 minutes or so that we can suspend to get the necessary procedure in place for that. Thank you very much.